Alright, let's learn about cells. They're like the thing about living things. It's not like jail cells we're learning about, or even spreadsheet cells, which I'm awfully fond of, being a spreadsheet nerd. But these are cells that make up all living things. That's what we're going to learn about today and for a while during this class. So cells, first of all, let's get a definition out there. They are the basic unit of structure and function in living things. As you can see in these pictures, they're kind of like the building blocks of life. You can think of them as. They look different from one organism to another, or even within the same organism. We have different kinds of cells that do different jobs or functions. And because they have different jobs, they're also going to look differently, which is their structure. So every job that's done in a living thing, such as ourselves, can be broken down to the cell level. They are doing the work for us. We haven't always known about cells. It's a pretty recent endeavor to actually be able to see something as small as a cell is. At the start, Robert Hooke and Anton von Leeuwenhoek were able to make these tools called microscopes. And they started out looking a little more like this, like a simple light microscope. Simple in the fact that it only has one lens. Nowadays, the microscopes in our room have two or more lenses, both in the objective and then the eyepiece. So since you're looking through two or more lenses, it's called a compound light microscope. So simple light is one, and then utilizing the light to see the object. One lens, two or more lenses, and nowadays we don't have one of these. They're kind of expensive, but yet awesome. Electron microscopes, and it actually shoots beams of electrons in order to produce an image that is has an incredibly high resolution, so you can see a lot of cool stuff at that microscopic level, like cells. So there were a lot of people that led the way here. People like Robert Hooke and Anton von Leeuwenhoek, and then these three guys actually did a lot of great things and made some advancements that led to our current cell theory. So this is Schwann, two German guys, and then Rudolf Virchow completed the cell theory. So it was multiple guys that discovered these three main things that make up our current cell theory. The first is that all living things are made of cells, whether it's a unicellular or one-celled organism, or an organism that is multicellular, such as us and dolphins and elephants and dust mites even, and stuff like that. They're all made of cells. If they're not made of cells, they're not actually a living thing. So that's kind of a key component of the cell theory. The second part of the cell theory is that cells are the basic units of structure and function in all living things. Notice that's kind of the definition of cells. They are the basic unit of what an organism will eventually look like and what that organism does. It's broken down to the cell level. The third part of the cell theory is that all cells are produced from other cells. In other words, all cells come from other cells. Gametes or sex cells come from the process called meiosis, and all other cells, somatic cells that make up multicellular organisms and unicellular organisms, come from a process called mitosis. So meiosis and mitosis we'll learn about later. It's just two different processes that where you start with a cell and it leads to the production of other cells. So all cells come from other cells. I've also mentioned this a little bit before in this video lesson, but you'll notice even within the same, in our human body, cells are quite different. This is a nerve cell. Notice its structure is different than a muscle cell. Its function is too. So a lot of the jobs of these cells will dictate what they look like. So these are nerve cells. These are 3 different types of muscle cells. We've got skin cells over here, and then bone cells like osteoclasts and osteoblasts that are quite different than the other cells as well. What we're going to focus on coming up here is the differences between cell types of different kingdoms, like animals, plants, and bacteria. They are remarkably different. There are a lot of similarities between animal cells and the cells that make up plants, or the cells that would make up a unicellular, one-celled organism like bacteria. So we're going to highlight those differences, but also give you a look at what makes them cells and what they have inside each cell. So animal cells are every animal cell has certain organelles inside it. Plant cells are different than animal cells in that they have a cell wall, chloroplasts, and a larger vacuole. So a cell wall is this outer membrane, rigid outer membrane that is outside of the cell membrane. Animal cells have a cell membrane around the perimeter of its contents, but a cell wall has that cell membrane, and in addition to that, it also has a cell wall that is more rigid and protective. Chloroplasts are something that is specific to plant cells and other cells that might make their own food. They take a big part of that process. It's also what makes plants green in large part. And then the larger vacuole you'll see. Animal cells have one, but it's not as big. Bacterial cells are different than the other two as well. Bacterial cells don't even have a nucleus that encases its genetic material or DNA. It's just kind of free-flowing inside the bacteria. These are smaller too, by the way. There aren't any membrane-bound organelles like Golgi bodies or endoplasmic reticulum or lysosomes. But they do have a cell wall. They have the genetic material, and that genetic material will go a long ways toward building the proteins that it needs, and it's going to build those proteins using ribosomes. So the contents of bacterial cells, they're pretty simple, but they do have a cell wall, genetic material, and ribosomes. Alright, we're going to take a look at some organelles. Organelles in general are tiny cell structures that carry out specific functions. And it's kind of like the members of the cell's team. You can think of them as, and everyone on the team has a specific function and thing that they're really good at. So let's take a look at some of these organelles that are present in, if not all cells, a lot of cells. So cell membrane is one. The cell membrane goes around the perimeter of animal cells, plant cells, bacterial cells. Every cell has a membrane that lets things in and out. Sometimes if this cell membrane was not performing the way it was supposed to and let too much water in, for example, that cell could lyse or burst open. If it doesn't have enough water inside the cell membrane will be able to draw that water in so that it can perform the functions that it needs to. So cell membrane is kind of a big deal. Cytoplasm is the jelly-like substance in between the cell membrane, the outside part, and then the nucleus, which is pictured here. So cytoplasm is just kind of everywhere. It's the medium in which everything is kind of floating around and doing their thing inside the cell. That's cytoplasm. Nucleus. All eukaryotic organisms, such as plants and animals, have a nucleus. Bacterial cells are prokaryotic, so they do not have a nucleus. We'll learn more about that later. But the nucleus is the command center. It's kind of like the brain, not perfectly like the brain of a human body, but it is the command center. It has all the genetic material or instructions for making DNA or making proteins, and the DNA is held there. So it's the home of chromosomes and genetic material, or DNA. Here's a picture and explanation of mitochondria. Animal and plant cells have these. and it's how cells get their energy. So glucose, or food, comes in to the cell. Mitochondria has the job of making energy out of that food. So in goes glucose, or food, out goes energy, or ATP. So this is where cellular respiration takes place to produce energy. We'll learn more about that later as well. All cells have ribosomes. These are the ones that make proteins. They get genetic material in, and they can make proteins out of it. Pretty awesome. That's ribosomes. ER, or endoplasmic reticulum, is the highway system for eukaryotic cells. The highway system. So it's a maze of passageways that carry proteins where they need to go. There's such thing as smooth endoplasmic reticulum that does not have ribosomes attached to it. But there's also rough endoplasmic reticulum that has those ribosomes, those protein makers, attached to this maze of passageways called endoplasmic reticulum. These have funny names. Hopefully you can remember them pretty well. The Golgi body is the packaging center for cells. It's good at making membranes for things to travel through and be protected by. It packages and ships materials throughout the cell. Alright, I spoke of the cell wall a little bit before, but that's the outside rigid layer of plant and bacterial cells. Animal cells do not have a cell wall, and they provide protection and support to make plants and bacteria stronger. Here's a picture of a lysosome, another organelle. This lysosome is kind of like the garbage collector. It breaks down particles and worn out cell parts, takes them out. So yeah, that's what lysosomes are. Chloroplasts use the sun's energy to make food, so only plants and photosynthetic bacteria and other organisms that can make their own food have these chloroplasts as an organelle, and it also gives that green color that plants have. And the last organelle that I'd like you to be familiar with is the vacuole. The vacuole will store food, water, and other materials. Animal cells do have them, although they're more prominent in plant cells, where more water is stored inside that vacuole. So that's a pretty quick crash course on organelles and cell theory. Hopefully you do well on this Edpuzzle video, and we'll keep on keeping on. Keep learning. Yes, let's do that.